I won't have to type my story so much.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
So we're recording now, so feel free to share.
Absolutely. So we're talking about sort of that inner belief or mindset that allowed me to overcome some of these things, correct? That's what you're interested in?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you could start with some of the internal objections that, you were telling yourself first as to why you shouldn't kind of go forth.
Sure. So before I got into entrepreneurship, period, there was this time, as you alluded to, where I had been a guitar player playing semi-professionally. I mean, it was how I was paying the bills. And I was studying university, and I'd made it through 3 of the 4 years of this university program. And physically, my I guess the tendons really in my wrist, just wrist forearms, just broke down to the point where I physically could not continue. I'd been pushing through pain for a number of years and doing all these different things, massage and physiotherapy, what have you, to try to get through this degree. And at some point, my body just quit and was like, it's just not going to happen anymore. So I had to decide what to do. And I had been very inspired by reading Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, I think like a lot of people. And I'd actually tried a number of entrepreneurial projects on the side, nothing which had borne any fruit in any shape, way, or form.
So you are normal.
But yeah, yeah, absolutely mortal. I mean, from silly stuff like in the late 90s or early 2000s, I already forget when exactly, I guess early 2000s, so being like a young teenager, seeing people selling stuff on eBay and seeing these, a bunch of ebooks on eBay, like how to make money on eBay by selling an ebook on eBay, that sort of thing. So my first sort of introduction to that pyramid-shaped business model, which goes way back to like the old, classified ads or newspaper ads where it's like, here's how I make money in my underwear, selling training on how to make money in my underwear, selling training and newspaper ads.
Yeah.
Same thing, different medium. So seeing stuff like that and seeing people, so I remember the first thing that me and a bunch of friends tried was when the Xbox 360 and PS2 came out. We saw people selling email addresses on eBay like ps2@gmail.com, or Xbox 360 at yahoo.com, and selling these things for like way too much money. So we're like, oh, we can duplicate that. So we registered not hundreds of email addresses, enough email addresses to try selling these on eBay. And one of my friends had his mom or dad set up an account because we were all under 18 and couldn't, and we got banned so quickly. So that's one of the very first failures I remember. And I don't know if I was 15 or 16 at the time, but there was always this thing, right? There's always this background of sort of entrepreneurial spirit, even if we were tactically or strategically and tactically rather hopeless at that time. So there were other attempts, but that was the one that really stands out. So anyway, back to the story. After this sort of guitar playing debacle or the end of my guitar career, I sort of had this really, to me, it really was like a black and white decision. I had friends who were like, oh, I can get you a job as a greeter at Cabela's, which was, I think, like an outdoor hunting and fishing store, or some other really like entry-level positions that don't really require a lot of fine motor skills, but would have this career path that wasn't very inspiring to me, especially when all my other friends, like almost all my friends, are either accountants or doctors. They're on these career paths and with these awesome upward trajectories, and I'm like, I could not live it. So it was partially like due to shame or trying to avoid that sense of shame that I went into entrepreneurship, because I was like, I couldn't live down going from like straight A students and top of my class in most things to greeter at this, hunting store, for example. I just couldn't do that. So instead, I came up with the really brilliant idea, and I'm saying that completely sarcastically, of selling all my stuff, moving overseas, and trying to figure out how to make money online. Needless to say, that didn't work very well, but not at first. So, but I essentially came to the point where I'm going to sink or swim, and I put myself in a position where I had to swim. I moved to Malaysia. I started with really low level. I didn't know what I was doing. I started with low level freelance gigs that, like I was literally the first month when I was making any money, I was making about $1 per hour for my time. It was absolutely insane. I don't think most people who grow up in the UK or Canada or the US have any idea what that's actually like. It's not a lot of fun. I was living in the cheapest backpacker hostel with cockroaches and bed bugs and all. Just, it was nasty. It was nasty business. So the thing that, I mean, there was some positive motivation, negative motivation, right? To actually answer your question, there was this, I didn't want to feel completely embarrassed about who I was and what I was doing. And I was in my mid early 20s at the time. So that sort of social pressure admittedly played a very big role in my decision-making process. And there was also the motivation of the sort of dream of being financially free, controlling my own destiny, and not reporting to someone else, right? So that was absolutely there. Can't tell you what played a bigger role, but it was really this combination of factors and just absolute pig-headed stubbornness that said, I can figure this out, I can do this, and nothing's going to stop me, which is something I've pretty much had my whole life. Like I started playing guitar when I was, 16 or something, and I got into university when I was 18. So I'd been playing for 2 years against people who'd started when they were 6. I was like, I'm going to figure this out, I'm going to do it. And I did it. And it's had a lot of negative consequences, but it's also had some of the best consequences of my life, having that particular characteristic. And I can't take credit for it. I didn't decide one day to be that way. That's sort of one of those things that I was both fortunate and unfortunate to end up with. The part of my DNA or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. So a big combination of factors. Does that actually answer your question? I hope it does.
Yeah, definitely. From multiple angles, which I think a lot of these things do come from multiple angles, because obviously the life that we live today is based on our experiences and decisions leading up to this specific moment, right? And there was a really interesting thing that you mentioned before, which you kind of forced yourself into a position of sink or swim, right? So it wasn't like you were in that position through no choice of your own, but you actually actively chose to put yourself in that position, okay? So as much as being a terrible interviewer, I'm going to try and surmise as to why you would do that, right? So sure. Is it the case that you would do that is because you know within yourself that when push comes to shove, that you will basically perform higher than your ability in the current moment?
That's a really good question. And I'm going to give my best impression of what seems to be true. And I'm a sample size of 1, and I don't know for a fact. But so actually, I want to qualify this. Knowing what I know now, if I could do it all over again, I actually wouldn't have done it that way. I think that it would have been much more responsible. I would have graduated much more quickly to a point where I was competent in getting clients. If, for example, I had got a job, paid for a coach, a business coach, and grown that way, because it took me years to figure out what the hell I was doing, and they weren't very happy years most of the time. So I actually think that the sink and swim approach that I chose for myself, it worked. I got here, but I think it caused a lot of undue stress and suffering, and I have a lot of great stories from it. I don't regret it, but I don't think it was the most effective. Like if we were to take like a cold, logical approach to things, which people aren't, then
people aren't logic. So
then absolutely it was not the most effective. Yeah. Like there are, like, for everyone who's a successful entrepreneur, online marketer, almost everyone has one of those rags to riches stories. Like I was living out of my car, or I was living in an attic that had no plumbing and all this stuff. But for everyone who succeeds, there's not confirmation bias, survivor bias, right? For every one of those people who succeed, I'm scared to think of the number of people who wouldn't have succeeded. Like if I was eventually, as you know, I got to work with Neil Patel, but if that hadn't happened, where would I be now? I have no idea, and I don't want to think about it. Like absolutely there's some skill there. I was able to persuade him to take me on. And I certainly had skills that it's not like I didn't have the skills to perform well, but if I hadn't have happened to be in a circumstance where I could communicate with Neil and where he said yes and gave me a chance, I might be instead of a relative success story, a success story in some sense, someone that no one had ever heard about, still trying to just feed myself, right? Mm-hmm. So with that sink or swim approach, absolutely. I mean, there's that certain stubbornness. I can figure it out if I put in 80 hours a week, and if I just go for this, I will figure it out. But I wouldn't really recommend it to anyone else, honestly. Yeah. I don't think it's the most responsible way to go about doing it.
Yeah. No, I think so you mentioned so you're in the internet marketing space, right? That's how you and I kind of initially connected and things. And we found that we had lots of things in common, and that's what I love about the space. I'm sure you do too, is that you can meet people from all over the world with this, I think I learned that you were a guitar player, much further down the line, for example. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. It's like, there's even more, behind the scenes that, really resonate with my kind of past as well. So one of the kind of concepts you speak about in internet marketing is everybody has a rags to riches story, right? And so what I've found to be true in a sense is that people often don't talk about the bit before that, right? And I call it the riches to rags story, right? So for example, you're usually in a kind of situation so for example, I think you were based out of Canada and you chose to move to essentially a second world country, I think, and put yourself in that state of discomfort, knowing that deep within you, you would find the light and the answer, right? Okay. If I was to shorten all those kind of thoughts down to this kind of one thing, right? But essentially, you're probably in a situation where, you could survive for a length of time. You could get a job where you could survive, for example. Okay. And I think this is what makes people so different, right? Is that we're wired for survival pretty much. Okay. And so it's kind of easy to fall into, yeah, you could have got the job at the kind of outdoor store and that kind of thing based on your friend's recommendations. But the fact that you chose to go from the kind of riches to rags, I think there's a kind of inner belief and inner trust that is a very kind of interesting point there. So my question to you is that when do you think it was that you discovered this inner ability to perform well under, immense discomfort and pressure?
If I had to pick something, I think this would go back to playing football, soccer, as you were, from a very, very early age. I was I don't remember exactly when I started playing, but it was from essentially the time when I could walk. So I was always used to playing competitive sports and doing other things competitively. I played some chess when I was growing up, and I was in tournaments. I did math contests when I was in elementary and junior high school. So I've almost always, most of my life, I've been in competitive environments where it's not completely true to say you're forced to sink or swim, but for a certain type of person, that's going to help you develop certain skills, right? Like that idea that no matter what happens, I'm going to maybe not succeed, but I'm going to give it my all. And I think that's really it. It's like, no matter what the circumstances are, you can't predict your own success, but if you have that certain drive or spark or whatever it is, that certain disposition to always perform at your best. And I think there's another sort of related disposition that helps, in that some people, when the pressure is at its highest, there are some people who are really uncomfortable and they sort of freeze up in that situation. And I think that's mostly genetic. I'm not sure. But I don't think that anyone chooses that, right? It's a physiological response. Someone freezes up, someone else gets focused in. And if you look at professional athletes, they're the ones that get super dialed in and perform best under pressure, right? And I think that I have that fortunate combination of, I've been in high pressure competitive situations for most of my life, as long as I can remember, and I'm lucky to have this certain characteristic where when the pressure is at its highest, that's when I perform my best. Actually, if the pressure is lower, then I slack off, I get lazy. I'm like almost anyone else. I'm a completely normal person. So I think going back to your, why did you choose to take this leap, or the riches to rags? Well, because when the pressure is the highest, that's when I tended to perform best over my life, and probably a big reason why I believed that I could do it. Don't know for sure, but that's my best guess at this point anyway.
Wonderful. It's a really difficult thing to articulate from the inside out, right? So it kind of leads me to my kind of next question. So we've spoken pretty much about how you got traction essentially in leading to where you are now, right? And so what I notice is once people kind of get that initial traction, right, is that they get used to, oh crap, I've had a kind of level of success there, and they kind of jump back from the frying pan into the fire in order to kind of recreate traction somewhere else in their life, right? As opposed to taking that and getting momentum with it. So was it the case for you once you got traction that you started going backwards a bit on yourself, or how was it you kind of overcame that what I would say would be a much harder hurdle is actually keeping that, turning that traction into momentum, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. So I think the best example of this is when I decided to stop working with Neil. So I worked for Neil Patel for almost 2 years, just a little under 2 years. And at some point I was comfortable. I'd gotten a raise. I was about to get another one, but I was, not that I was getting complacent, but it was like there was no more room to grow. The person a step above me was my boss, was Neil's CMO. I would never take that position, and I didn't want to take it from someone who I considered a great friend and mentor and whatever. So there wasn't any competition there, right? But it was like, at this point, I'm just turning the crank. Like, I'm working for these high ticket clients, writing email sequence and webinars, and that's great. I'm getting lots of experience, but it's at the point of diminishing returns. So start to work with Neil, and you have no choice. You're going like this. There's a steep learning curve, but you sink or swim. And eventually I think, okay, I'm swimming now, and it's sort of plateau. So in some sense, just like with the moving overseas, I probably would have been better off in some sense not making that somewhat crazy decision. And likewise, in terms of my learning curve, if I'd continued working with all these 7- and 8-figure, and probably even, well, did he have 9-figure? I don't know. But all these massive clients, right, who are spending tons of money on their stuff. So we're getting great data. We're able to test different things. It's hard to say what I'd be different right now, right? So, but I gave that up and was like, okay, now I'm going to go on my own and see if I can find my own clients and my own projects and get my own case studies and sort of build this other thing. And in many ways, that was an absolute step back. Immediately I had another big jump because I was back in this fire, out of the frying pan into the fire. And I went from making my normal salary to making, like, putting $20,000 plus in my pocket every month. And I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. Like, I'm so glad I did this. I didn't even know that this was possible for me, of all people. But then, as you said, there's sort of this point where I fell off the cliff. And I don't know if it's probably a combination of stopping doing what was working and burnout and all these other things that happen when you're on your own. The structure isn't there for you, and a lot of it's new, and it's easy to get away from what works because you're the one making all the decisions every day. So instead of being in the system and turning the crank, it's like, what am I going to do this day or this week or this month? And not necessarily understanding where some of that success could come from. Like, you get 2 clients and they're paying you a big monthly retainer, but then when that project ends, where's the next one coming from? I didn't necessarily have a refined client generating system. So I got some here and there, but there's all these peaks and valleys and peaks and valleys.
Sure.
So I'm not sure if I answered your question there, but
no, this is all great. I mean, the questions that I'm asking you, I mean, is designed to help for you to spill your guts, basically. That's what I'm looking for, you know.
That's working great, I think.
Yeah, and it's amazing, like, how we you know, through just kind of rediscovering things. Like, so for example, because I found there's lots of likenesses with you and I. We've never met in person before. We came close to it once, right?
Very close.
We were in the same city, like if for one day, I think, and we didn't meet
Yeah,
because we didn't know. But it will happen, I'm sure. You know.
of course it will.
But I'm going to hazard a guess, right? So if you're anything like me, I hate being static, right? I hate feeling like I'm stuck in static, right? And so
Yes.
in your hindsight, you're saying, you know, if I could go back and do things differently, then I probably would have done it this way, right? But I think what I believe to be true is that if you felt that kind of stuck static way in Canada, then essentially the only option is to jump out of the frying pan into the fire in order to you know, swim somewhere else, essentially. Okay, wrong analogy to the wrong next thing to do, but you get what I'm saying, because basically, in order to change reality as it is today, we need to hugely change our environment and our comfort levels and these kind of things. I mean, these are all things that feed into our environment, essentially, right? Would you say
Yeah.
that was true?
Absolutely, absolutely. The thing that I've learned, at least about myself, and I think we're all a little bit different because we have different temperaments and react differently under different circumstances, right? So I think designing your environment to force growth or facilitate growth, absolutely one of the most sensible things to do in the world. What I've found for myself now is instead of building something up to this point where, okay, there's this plateau here and I'm static, instead of just throwing all that in the garbage can, which I've done a number of times. I've done it more than I care to admit. Having something working great, money's coming in, and get bored with it essentially because it is static and it's like the growth has sort of stopped. Instead of just throwing everything, what I've done now and what I'm doing now is I'm working with a business coach to be like, okay, how do we take what I currently have going for me and reshape it into the thing I actually want? The place I want to grow next, the place I want to go next, whatever that happens to look like, to avoid some of this big fall off the cliff and then rising from the ashes. So it's more like building on success. And of course, it is still, you take a step back to make a couple steps forward, but I don't think there has to be this boom and bust cycle. I think we can sort of, at least I can for myself, and again, I can't speak for everyone, but instead of going like this, deep down, deep up, minimize the down and sort of build from what's already working. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm in the middle of that process. I can't guarantee that it's going to work better, but it's a lot less stressful anyway. And I'm having more fun than I have in the last couple of years. And I'm really loving what I'm doing every day. And I'm not as stressed out. I don't get burnt out. So there have been some big positives. And that might be part of even just getting older. I'm 31 now. I don't want to work 80 to 100 hours a week. I don't want to have my arms hurt at the end of the week or at the end of the day, just for the cause, just to go from making more than enough money to more than enough money plus 20%.
Yeah,
right? It's a different priority now. So I think that plays a role as well.
love it. Okay, cool. So tell me if from what you've observed from yourself and working with other people as well. So obviously you've worked with other people who are essentially grow their business in some shape or form, right? So often we think of, so you spoke about taking steps back, okay? Now, a lot of people can feel that, you know, when you're trying to force that rock or that elephant up the stairs type thing, okay? And they feel like they move several steps back, and they can feel that that's kind of like an element that they're failing, right? And so they get disheartened and they kind of slide back further, okay? The kind of thing that I've been working on personally is when it gets to the stage where like when you're kind of driving forward, but then you kind of stop, okay? Is, you know, rather than try and kind of force things, is to actually choose to take a few steps back so that you can see things from, you know, the kind of the balcony view, essentially. And that's what I love about working with, you know, business coaches myself as well, is that it's really difficult to kind of read the bottle from in, you know, or read your label from inside the bottle, which I think is probably one of my favorite sayings, right? everybody has blind spots, regardless of, what level your expertise is. I don't think you ever get to the point where like people talk about self-mastery, and I don't think self-mastery means perfection, right? I think self-mastery is all about knowing when to stop kind of like putting things down to ourselves and actually asking for help. I think that's self-mastery in many ways. Okay. It's just knowing actually when to stop internalizing and asking for help. Right.
Absolutely.
So with that kind of, exercise of, rather than kind of looking forward all the time or measuring progress, is sometimes progress needs to happen from taking those steps back voluntarily, as opposed to feeling it, the world push against you type thing. Okay. Is that something that you exercise, or is that something that you're familiar with when it comes to getting to that initial stuck stage? And when you take those steps back, are they through your own choice, or is it something that happens and you feel a bit crap about yourself for a few days or even a few weeks? What kind of happens with you?
So I definitely have those points where I get stuck up against this wall and I push for longer than maybe it would be sensible to push. And that can certainly be discouraging. And yeah, I can get frustrated with myself and down on myself. That's one of many reasons I think that, like, one of the best decisions that I've ever made was working with a coach. And it can take, I've worked with a number of coaches. I've spent a lot of money on coaching, actually. And I've worked with some people that were insanely talented, but didn't give me the right sort of, I guess, emotional support in some sense, because there's a lot of people who can give you information and action steps. But I think one of the things that you're alluding to also in terms of some of these cycles is, how do you actually feel about your progress and what even constitutes progress? So one of the things, sort of to go down that rabbit hole for a second, one of the things that I've tried to do for myself is reframe progress and understand progress more as skill acquisition that's going to pay me over the long term. Like right now I can't remember the last day when I didn't have someone reaching out to me asking if they can pay me money for some copywriting stuff. That's not actually typical. Usually it's peaks and valleys, but for the last couple of weeks, so it's not a huge long thing, but the last couple of weeks, it's like every day messages in my inbox being like, do you have room to take on clients? And part of me wants to be like, yes, I want to take everything because this is so cool and these projects are interesting and there's so much money to be made. But taking that step back and be like, I have to say no to all these people, and I even have to say no to outsourcing this to other perfectly talented people I know, because it's not the thing I want to build right now. And coming from that perspective, it's like, what's the end game? What's the thing that I actually want to do and actually want to build? And are these steps that I'm currently taking, like if I'm up against the wall, I'm actually pushing in the right direction? Do I push through, or do I take steps back and be like, oh, this wasn't the right direction anyway. I don't have to push through this. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And one of the most valuable things about working with a coach is I've had moments in the last couple of months where I've been like, I want to just burn everything to the ground and start over. And I talk to her and she's like, everything's fine. Everything you're doing is working. Just have to reframe some things, or like take that step back and you're like, what are we actually doing here? Refocus on that goal, refocus on the bigger vision, refocus on building the thing you want to build. You're like, oh, then the direction forward is actually obvious. Usually the what to do and how to do it is obvious. It's usually, I find, more dealing with some of the distractions, especially the internal distractions, dealing with some of those more challenging emotions when things don't go right the first time or the 10th time. And to, for example, to try something new and not have it be a home run the first time, but just get data and feedback and maybe one or two buyers to validate the concept. But still be like, I'm so used to having things work so well. And then you're like, this thing is frustrating and it sucks, but it's actually a big win when something works just a little bit. So it's a lot of stuff like that. And I guess the last thing I want to say about that is really outsourcing my the emotional response system, or how I respond to certain things to another human being who can see things more objectively. And
Yeah.
this is a pattern I've noticed in myself. I constantly want, not constantly, but every quarter or every certain amount of time, it's like, this project sucks. I want to just burn it all to the ground. It's like, well, it's actually working fine. It's not usually working better than fine. It's just this one tiny thing. And it's often not even the thing that I think it is. So
Yeah.
there's some more material for you.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. And just lastly, okay, just to round things up, because I'm aware of your time as well. So we spoke about when you try things for the first time, it doesn't work. The second time, or even the 10th time, it doesn't work, right? And this is where I see people getting the necessary traction towards their success. In the people will so commonly I've seen people just jump from one thing to something completely different, right? And that might be a different niche, or it might be a different platform, completely changing everything. It's like burn the ships, this isn't working, and change to something else. Okay. And what I've found is, from the kind of fewer successful people that I work with and connected with, is that they're really good at just iterating on something that's not working, and then knowing that by iterating and pivoting ever so slightly, they're eventually going to like knock on a door that works, right? How important do you think that is building that skill? And what do you think needs to happen in order to build that skill and trust that, rather than just jumping from one thing to another, that staying kind of like in that zone of discomfort, you're eventually going to get there by not just pushing against the same door, so to speak, but sometimes even creating a new door. Like, one of my favorite sayings is, if opportunity doesn't knock, build a door, right? And I think that kind of lends itself very kindly to, when you are in that position where you're pushing against a door to open, and it doesn't. Sometimes it's just a case of trying a different door, which is very close to the original one, meaning you don't have to change everything. It's just like change something that's, the small hinge that's going to swing the big door, and find that piece. So, sorry, my question to you, Andrew, is how much of that would you say is, true, and what would you recommend in building those steps, rather than jump from one thing to another, is taking it back and focusing on iterating, as opposed to burning it all down and starting all over again? We still on, or
I'd be hard pressed to put something above that.
Okay.
Oh, are we good?
Yeah, I think we're good. I think my double question just crashed Zoom, but I think we're good now.
All right. So I think this is one of the most important things. I'd be hard pressed to find something I'd put above this. There might be things equally as valuable, but I think this is absolutely critical. I know for myself that it's hard to have multiple failures, because most of us have a certain degree of pride, and to fall down again and again and again and not feel like we're making progress. One, that's an illusion, because usually we are, especially if we're asking good questions. But two, it's hard to take that ego beating. Like, it's not fun. So one of the things that I've done for myself, and that I recommend to a lot of people, is redefine what progress counts as. Progress doesn't have to be bottom line dollars in the bank. Usually it's learning, right? Like, that's the measurable thing. It's like, if I'm going to test anything, if it doesn't work, there has to be some lesson that I can learn from that. If not, it's not a test worth running. Because it could work and I could not understand why it worked, and therefore not be able to duplicate it, or it could not work and I not understand it, and then I'm also screwed. So regardless of what I'm testing, it might be testing a certain audience or a certain message or a certain offer, or any combination of those, because it's usually a combination, but it's usually the hypothesis it's like, okay, just for an example, will this particular audience, not just will this particular audience buy, does this particular audience have the money to afford this high ticket thing? And by talking to a bunch of people within that audience and testing that proposition, you can get a yes or a no to that. So you can test prices like that. Like, maybe I'm pricing things way above people's heads if it's not working. And so for me, it's a lot of troubleshooting. Like, what are all the possible reasons that this thing would not work? And then what are the most likely ones? Am I pricing myself up into the stratosphere? Am I credible? Am I believable? Is my offer something that people even want? And all of these things are discoverable, right? They're either discoverable directly by talking to people, or they're discoverable through research. And they're saying, okay, well, there's 100 other businesses selling this thing. Clearly people are buying this. But regardless of what I'm testing, there's absolutely iteration involved, and there always has to be this. To me, it's learning and skill building are the metrics. If I'm building my skills, it's a win. If I'm learning something new about this offer, audience, messaging, that's a win. And as you said, it's often a matter of readjusting or building a door next to the door. I like to use a golf analogy. Like, every time you hit the ball, not every time, usually when you hit the ball, you get closer to the hole. Sometimes you might go to the side. Sometimes you might get caught in the sand trap. Sometimes whatever might happen. Sometimes you might not even know where the hole is on the green. But with this sort of mindset of, I'm trying to learn something versus I'm trying to get this result this time, I think that can help a lot of people. It certainly helps me overcome that impetus to trash everything and jump to something completely new. Because you have to go through that. This is the thing. You have to go through that whole learning process anyway. You might as well go through the rest of the process you've already started instead of going to something completely new and hoping you're going to hit the hole in one. You're probably not going to hit the hole in one. It sometimes happens, but you can't. This is one thing that I tell a lot of people all the time. You can't expect to be the expectation to the rule. If you do, if you're expecting to be the expectation to the rule, you're doing something wrong. Because even if you succeed, you're not going to be able to sustain that. It's because you won't have all those skills and you won't have all that insight into the marketplace.
Yeah, got you. So what you're saying is you can't expect to be the exception to the rule. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
right,
I can't expect to win the lottery. I can't expect, if my business model is hit a hole in one, it's not a good business model.
Got you. Love it.
Yeah, it's black and white. I can either win or lose in one shot. If it doesn't work, I'm jumping ship again and starting over. Through that, I'd rather be like, if it's a par 5, I'd rather get there in 10 strokes and get there than say, well, if I don't get there, if I don't break par, then it's a failure.
Yeah.
Through that,
Got you.
I'd rather be rich than right. I'd rather get there over time than get it on the first try.
Like it. You'd rather be rich than right. That's awesome, man. That's so cool. Andrew,
that's not
thank
mine.
you. Do you know what? Everything I say is not mine either. You know, I think it's like music. You know, it's like you listen to all your influences, and you know it comes out sounding like you, but it's actually a little bit. You know, for me, it's a bit of Led Zeppelin, a bit of Free, a bit of the Rolling Stones.
Yeah,
it's not original to me, but it might be the way in which I kind of do something is kind of slightly different. You know, but I think that's the same to say about
absolutely.
Everything in life is that, you know, we're basically creating our own, we're contributing a verse, you know, we're creating our own recipes as we kind of go through life and that kind of thing. And I love that. Andrew, thank you so much for giving us the insights to your insights, pretty much, to find out what really kind of goes on, you know, under the hood, because I know that, you know, from the outside, things can look amazing, but it's usually the people who get the longevity that go through all the crap and then go through it. You know, it's not like the crap disappears, right? It's that we just get better at dealing with it, you know, or just recognizing that it's crap and then we steer away from it or what have you. But it's always there, right? There's no, the grass is greener on the other side type thing. So, you know, that's what I really love about you, Andrew, is that you're so kind of grounded. It's, especially in the sense that, you know, the way I kind of look at you is, you know, to kind of go, you know, Neil, as a Neil Patel, I am going to go and do my own thing now. It's like, there must have been part of you is just like, what the hell am I doing? You know? But to have that kind of, that courage to kind of go on your own and realize you'd maybe kind of got to a point where you'd you traveled the furthest, right? And so that moving on to pastures new, you needed to start a new journey and that kind of thing. Like from the outside, it's obvious to me as to why those things happen. But from a very kind of black and white scenario, it's like people would have maybe questioned and said, Andrew, have you taken your pills this morning? Or have you gone completely off your rocker,
Yeah, pretty much. So just to that point, well, two things. First of all, thank you so much for having this conversation. It was an absolute pleasure for me. So thank you for that. And I don't remember what the other thing was because I lost my train of thought, but thank you, Finn. It was an absolute pleasure. I think you summarized things really well. And yeah, if you ever want to jam again sometime, just hit me up because I love doing this with you.
Love it, man. Love it. Well, I've got heaps of content that I'm going to be using in my forthcoming book, The Law of Traction. Okay. What I'm considering doing is having these as bonus interviews. Okay. So yeah, if you're happy with that and things, I'll basically cut our kind of interview bit, but also have this as, basically you're one of the people that I've learned within my path in terms of learning not just about myself, but essentially what other people do as well in terms of getting to where they're going essentially. And I've really, really kind of loved your journey. I've loved your transparency. Obviously we've kind of worked together in different ways. I've bought some of your programs and, we've done some things together before as well. And I really kind of love that kind of aspect in that, you're probably going to have more programs that I'm going to be interested in and that kind of thing. There might be other opportunities for us to work together at a later date and that kind of thing. I really love that kind of, that feeling about you, even especially being that you're somebody who I connected with online and almost met once,
I feel exactly the same. Yeah. And obviously we'll meet each other at some point. It's more a matter of when and where than
exactly.
If. And I remember what I wanted to say, and I do want to say this because it is super important. And I hope that whoever listens to this really does take this away and takes this to heart. And that is that from everything I've seen, from working with decamillionaires to even people who have like $1 billion of assets under management, you've never made it. There's never a point where you get to be like, okay, that's it, I'm done. It's never hard anymore. No, it's like, however you feel about what you're doing right now is probably almost exactly how you'll feel about it when you so-called made it, when you're making twice as much money or 10 times as much money, because you are still you. And I still have absolute terrible days and I have terrible weeks. And fortunately, I have a lot of really like rapturous days and fabulous weeks. And the good far outweighs the bad, but none of us get the luxury of saying, I've made it and nothing's ever going to be hard ever again. So I think that's one reason to, whatever it is you choose to do, to choose something that you like 80% of the time. You're never going to like anything 100% of the time. But if you can do anything, you might as well do something that you truly derive some sort of soul fulfilling joy from, because it's so easy to find something that you're going to hate and that sucks. With all those options, you might as well enjoy as much of it as you can.
Love it, man. Could you tell me, so just before we kind of sign off for today, what is the bit within your soul that gives you that kind of warm feeling when you're basically in your zone, you're in flow, you're doing what you want to do? How can you best articulate and describe that? What is it?
Being in the zone, being in flow, I think it really is where you're not really thinking anymore. You're just feeling the world in some sense. And that might be whether you're playing a guitar. For me, it's playing guitar, snowboarding, playing team sports, and sometimes copywriting or analysis of copy. You can get in that zone where time disappears. And I think for me, really the defining factor is the thinking stops. This constant dialogue, like, what am I having for lunch? And is this a good idea or is this stupid? all of that just disappears and you're just doing the thing. That's the best thing. The thinking disappears. That's when I know that I'm in flow. There's no really words going. Now, okay, if I'm writing copy, there might be words, but it's a different type of wordsmithing, I suppose. It's almost like having that conversation that's just coming out where you're not self-analyzing and there's not that other conversation going on. Yeah, when the conversation disappears, that's to me the answer.
Love it. So cool. To hook up with you, Andrew, and wishing you the best as always. And hopefully we can do this again. I can pull some more golden nuggets from your expertise. I mean, man, you've been through so much in, what I would say quite a short period of time. A lot of people drift into careers and, they do the same career for like 20, 30, 40 years sometimes. And you've basically changed careers maybe, on average, maybe 10 times already, it's like
something like that.
Yeah. And my hats off to you. I totally respect you. And I totally love, you're an inspiration to me in many ways, as well as, a lot of other people who follow you. So please keep doing what you're doing. Okay. Even on those kind of crappy days. Because when your post comes out, I genuinely do get that kind of small feeling of excitement. It's just like, oh, cool. What's Andrew talking about today? So, keep going, man. And keep leading the way you do best.
Thank you so much, Ben. That's one of the best compliments I could receive. So, we'll absolutely do this again. Maybe I can turn the tables on you and interview you because you're also up to a bunch of cool stuff.
Nice one. Yeah, cool. Be up for that anytime.
Keep me posted on the book. I'd love to check it out. So,
will do, man.
Thank you again for having me.
And this is kind of like an accountability exercise for me as well, in that it's so easy to go, yeah, it's a great idea, I'm going to write a book or something like that. But I often find that a lot of what I do kind of stems back to this getting traction and then turning that into momentum. I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. And as well, from a copywriting point of view, I know that, the law of traction isn't that dissimilar to the law of attraction, So hopefully it's quite good for kind of keywords and things like that as well. So you can tell, there has been a bit of marketing in the background as well. But I think it's a great topic, and thank you so much for your input, Andrew.
My pleasure, my friend. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Nice one. Have a great night, because I think you're ahead of us. And let's just stay in touch and speak soon, okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Cheers for now, man.
Take care.
Bye-bye.